Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen says Europe will not yield to pressure and blackmail over US President Donald Trump's plans to annex Greenland. EU ambassadors are set to hold an emergency meeting over Trump's new threat to raise tariffs on 8 European countries until they allow the US to buy the autonomous Danish territory. Trump claims he needs the Arctic island for national security reasons, but allies say threatening Denmark plays right into Russian President Vladimir Putin's hands.
Ice, space, and strategic power. For the United States, Greenland is a gateway to the Arctic, a region growing in military and economic importance as ice melts and new shipping routes open. The White House's latest attempt to annex the world's largest island is to mount economic pressure on the EU countries that support Greenland's sovereignty. President Donald Trump posted that starting from the 1st of February, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands and Finland will be charged a 10% tariff on any and all goods sent to the United States of America. European leaders have warned against what they call a dangerous downward spiral if the levies are implemented. The EU's foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas replying in a post, "China and Russia must be having a field day. They are the ones who benefit from divisions among allies. If Greenland's security is at risk, we can address this inside NATO. Tariffs risk making Europe and the United States poorer and undermine our shared prosperity." One British MP warned of the impact on global peace.
Yeah, we think it's totally wrong that he'd do that. It's an act of intimidation. This is an ally of ours, an ally of the US's, is part of NATO, a hugely important alliance in terms of world peace.
Trump argues Greenland is vital to counter Russia. Its location between North America and Russia makes it central to missile defense, Arctic surveillance, and future shipping routes. The US already has military bases on the island and has traditionally worked closely with Denmark on security. But it wants more. As Washington signals it's prepared to take what it wants, the island remains at the center of a global contest, even as its own people insist their future is not for sale.
John Glen is the Chief Economist at the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, joining us from Manchester. John, good to see you. How worried is the business community about the possibility of these further tariffs?
Well, the business community is always influenced by the noise that is coming out of Washington. But to that extent, we have to differentiate between the rhetoric, the noise, and the reality. So from a European perspective, and particularly from what we might call the Greenland 8, they're particularly impacted by US tariffs on automobiles and on machinery, of which we export quite a lot. And they have been hit most by the tariffs. But if you look at the other portfolio of products inside the European Union, deals have been cut in closed doors behind all of the noise, which mean that the average level of tariffs for those products is much lower. So there's a whole diplomatic issue that has to be maintained here. If we can maintain a degree of certainty, if we can lower the noise, lower the rhetoric, then we can keep these negotiations going.
So maybe one way to look through the noise is to look at what has come before. We've been here before. The threats, the tariff tables in the Rose Garden, and those tariffs were imposed, John. Were the initial round of US tariffs as bad for businesses trying to get goods into the US as we initially feared?
Absolutely not. Although my friends in Stuttgart, who've been hit by, as I said, the impact of tariffs on automotive and machinery, they have taken a hit. But other areas, blood products, pharmaceuticals, aerospace, gas turbines, the average level of tariffs there is around 2-3%, nowhere near the 15-16% that automotive are feeling.
French President Emmanuel Macron is urging the European Commission to consider triggering its so-called anti-coercion instrument. The unofficial name for that is the bazooka, the trade bazooka, the language is starting to sound like we're on the brink of a trade war. Are we?
Yeah. So there is an issue in Europe. We don't want to be seen to be taking a step backward. You know, if somebody is going to come and bully you, as it were, it's important that you stand up to that. But then at the same time, it's important that in the background we start negotiating. What does the US want out of Greenland? It wants resource and it wants geopolitical military safety. Both of those can be achieved in agreement with the European Union. Both of those can be advanced to a greater extent in agreement with the European Union and with NATO. So it makes sense to maintain those relationships, to maintain those alliances. And I think that's what I tend to refer to, the adults in the room behind the rhetoric coming out of Washington are going to be seeking to try and maintain.
Yeah, very good. You forecast my next question, because usually when a political situation threatens to get out of control, you hear people urging dialogue. Do you think many business owners exporting to the United States will have faith that talking and reasoning with Donald Trump is the best way forward? Or, as you say, are these conversations best had between others?
I think reasoning with Donald Trump is a difficult thing to do, you know, but we have to accept that there's going to be that level of noise. But then we negotiate in the background. We try and make common sense agreements that are good for all parties in the background. And we've seen that to a certain extent in terms of the tariffs, absenting what I said about automotive and machinery. So we need to keep negotiating. We need to make sure that we get an outcome which is good for trade, is good for our economies, is good for the global economy, is good for wealth creation in North America and wealth creation in the European Union, and assures the access to resource that we need going forward to maintain our wealth, and assures the access to geopolitically important regions of the world where those relationships already exist, as you showed in your trailer to this section of your programme. We just need to extend those relationships and ensure that we all get what we want out of these negotiations.
Brilliant, John. John Glen is the Chief Economist at the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, joining us from Manchester. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Chris Southworth is the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce in the United Kingdom, joining us from Manchester. Good to see you. You're working so closely with businesses around the world, particularly in the UK. How worried are they about current developments? How worried is the business community about the possibility of further tariffs?
Well, the UK business community will be just as concerned as business communities right across Europe, particularly Northern Europe, who are most impacted by this, and also US business. We shouldn't forget that. US businesses are in the same position we are for much of the case, but under a much more challenging situation where they can't necessarily speak up. So, you know, we have a huge interest in this from the UK, both from an economic point of view, but also from a political point of view, a military defence point of view, and also a constitutional point of view. Don't forget, Canada is a member of the Commonwealth with King Charles as head of state. So, you know, we, and with the largest economy and military presence on the northern flank of Europe. So, you know, there's lots of common interest here. You know, Greenland, let's not forget, what's going on in the Greenland area, in the Arctic in general, is climate change has led to a thawing of the ice, and that's opened up major shipping lanes on both sides of Greenland. And so there's a lot of new activity and new potential there to cut shipping and trade with multiple differing interests across that Arctic region, but we all share the same concerns.
Chris, with all of that in mind, we have been here before. The threats, the tariff tables in the Rose Garden, and Trump's there, the big show. Those tariffs were imposed. Were the initial round of US tariffs as bad for business trying to get goods into the US as we feared initially?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's so hard for businesses, or even those involved in it, frankly, to keep track of what's actually happened versus what's actually been said. So if you look at what was announced in Liberation Day earlier last year in April, and that was, you know, anything from 10% to 20% plus. Actually, if you look at what's going on now, the average sort of European tariff going into the US is 2 to 5%. It's far less with the exception of some particular sectors like automotive, which is slightly higher at 15%. So there's a lot of noise on tariffs, but the reality is quite different, and some tariffs haven't come in at all.
Right.
So for all the talk of tariffs, I think the priority now is just to stay calm. There's a lot to play for. We need to support a diplomatic dialogue, and there's no guarantee that any tariffs will happen at all.
Right, so diplomatic dialogue, it leads me to the next question of what to do now. What options do the affected countries realistically have to respond? Could we see counter-tariffs or coordinated EU action in response?
Well, I think Europe in general, the UK and the EU together are playing a smart game. Let's keep this diplomatic and off X and social media. There is a lot of shared economic and political and defence interests here, so there's absolutely no reason why we should be having any of this conversation, frankly. But let's not forget Europe have levers here, and significant levers, albeit they will not want to pull them, because that has damaging implications for both European-US relations, but also importantly with NATO as well, being all of us in that grouping. But Europe could do all sorts of things. They can reciprocate on tariffs. They could limit potentially access to US military bases, and those are of strategic importance to the US. Or they could start to say, actually, we're not going to start buying or keep buying US military equipment in the way that we have in the past. That's half of all US military exports. So these are huge economic forces that Europe could apply if it wanted to, but won't want to, and quite understandably so.
With that said, French President Emmanuel Macron is urging the European Commission to consider triggering its so-called anti-coercion instrument. The unofficial name for these measures is the trade bazooka. I'm sure that's the one that will feature in the headline eventually. The language is starting to sound like we are on the brink of a trade war. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and there's obviously bullish comments coming out of Denmark and Greenland for obvious reasons, and from the UK, which is quite unusual. The UK tends not to speak up too abruptly to the US, but actually in this case has been very clear. So we should not be surprised by any of that. That's the Europe, in my view, sort of applying sort of verbal pressure in response to what the US is saying. The most important thing is we stay calm, certainly for business. And support diplomatic dialogue. From a business point of view, we're living in a changing economic order in the world. Russia, China, US, Europe, and others, those power shifts are all in play. And businesses need agility so that they can move finance, goods, services in and out across their global supply chains with ease. So, from a business point of view, all of this change is not a temporary thing, it's a permanent thing in the global economic order, and we need to be absolutely focused on enabling businesses to be agile, and that means we need reformed regulations, we need agile policies and laws, we need to be getting rid of all this bureaucracy that hampers trade all the time, so that companies can move money, goods and services much faster. We know the evidence, we know it works, but we're not doing it at scale. So we really need to accelerate that, and then our economies will be less impacted, and we can reduce the risk and cost on business while all of this political change is underway.
Chris, great to get your voice into the discussion. Chris Southworth, the International Chamber of Commerce, United Kingdom. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.